Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, Choline Seed to Serendipity. Today is August 2nd, 2022, and I would like to bring you this day in history. On August 2nd, 1990, about 2 a.m. local time, Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait, Iraq's tiny, oil-rich neighbor. Kuwait defense forces were rapidly overwhelmed, and those that were not destroyed retreated to Saudi Arabia. The Emir of Kuwait, his family, and other government leaders fled to Saudi Arabia, and within hours Kuwait City had been captured, and the Iraqis had established a providential government. By annexing Kuwait, Iraq gained control of 20% of the world's oil reserve, and for the first time a substantial coastline on Persian Gulf. The same day, the United Nations Security Council anonymously denounced the invasion and demanded Iraq's immediate withdrawal from Kuwait. On August 6th, the Security Council imposed a worldwide ban trade with Iraq. On August 9th, Operation Desert Shield, the U.S. defense of Saudi Arabia, began as U.S. forces raced to the Persian Gulf. Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, meanwhile, built up his occupying army in Kuwait, about 300,000 troops. On November 29th, the UN Security Council passed a resolution authorizing the use of force against Iraq if it failed to withdraw by January 15, 1991. Hussein refused to withdraw his forces from Kuwait, which he had established as a province of Iraq, and some 70,000 Allied troops, primarily American, gathered in the Middle East to enforce the deadline. At 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on July 16, 1991, Operation Desert Storm, the massive U.S.-led offensive against Iraq, began as the first fighter aircraft were launched from Saudi Arabia and off U.S. and British aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. All evening, aircraft from the U.S.-led military coalition pounded targets in and around Baghdad as the world watched the events transpire on television footage. Transmitted live via satellite from Iraq. Operation Desert Storm was conducted by an international coalition under supreme command of the U.S. General Norman Schwarzkopf and featured forces from 32 nations, including Britain, Egypt, France, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. During the next 6 weeks, the Allied forces engaged in an intense air war against Iraq's military and civilians infrastructure and encountered a small, effective resistance from the Iraqi Air Force and air defense. Iraqi ground forces were helpless during this stage of war, as Hussein only significant retaliatory measure was the launching of the Scud missile attacks against Israel and Saudi Arabia. Saddam hoped that the missile attacks would provoke Israel to enter the conflict, thus dissolving Arab support of the war. At the request of the United States, however, Israel remained out of the war. On February 24th, a massive coalition ground offense began, and Iraqis' outdated and poorly supplied armed forces were rapidly overwhelmed By the end of the day, the Iraqi army had effectively folded. 10,000 of its troops were held as prisoners, and a U.S. air base had been established deep inside Iraq. After less than 4 days, Kuwait was liberated, and the majority of the Iraqi armed forces were either surrendered, retreated to Iraq, or been destroyed. On February 28th, U.S. President George Bush declared a ceasefire, and on April 3rd, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 687 specifying the conditions of a formal end to the conflict. According to the resolution, Bush's ceasefire would become official. Some sanctions would be lifted, but the ban on Iraqi oil sales would continue until Iraq destroyed its weapons of mass destruction under the UN supervision. On April 6th, Iraq accepted the resolution, and on April 11th, the Security Council declared it in effect. During the next decade, Saddam Hussein frequently violated the terms of the peace agreement, prompting further Allied airstrikes and continuing UN sanctions. In the Persian Gulf War, 148 American soldiers were killed and 457 wounded. The other Allied nations suffered about 100 deaths combined during Operation Desert Storm. There were no official figures for the number of Iraqi casualties, but it is believed that at least 25,000 soldiers were killed and more than 75,000 were wounded, making it the most one-sided military conflict in history. It is established that 10,000 Iraqi civilians died from wounds or from lack of adequate water, food, and medical supplies, directly attributable to the Persian Gulf War. In the ensuing years, more than 1 million Iraqi civilians have died as a result of the subsequent UN sanctions. I hope you enjoyed this day in history, and I hope that you have a great day, and I want you to remember to smile, because I love you, but more importantly, God loves you. Bye. I'll see you in my next video.